So we have gotten the bombshell news that Michael Chandler will now be fighting Charles Oliveira in November. Now, look, I did not see this coming. I did not see this coming at all. Honestly, I had a weird feeling that they were going to match up Charles against Volk, but all right, we got Michael Chandler. That's a very, very different matchup for sure. The initial reaction to this fight announcement has been interesting. You have Conor McGregor tweeting out that Chandler is running from him. That Chandler saw the footage of Conor stuffing that singular takedown, and now Michael Chandler doesn't want the fight. And Michael Chandler thought the best way he could handle this accusation was to take his shirt off, sit on top of his desk, kind of spread his legs out a little bit, and just have a heart-to-heart with us. And, it was interesting for sure. I mean, Michael he fired back at all the fans, calling him an idiot for wasting his career waiting for Conor McGregor. And Mike said, no, I've actually gotten a lot of exposure for waiting for Conor McGregor these past 2 years. And, I think it's safe to say people are not really buying it. They're not really buying it at all, which I don't blame them. But, look, I mean, is this Conor McGregor's fault that this fight essentially is now not happening technically? I mean, yes, I do. But I also think, look, the UFC always has a problem making a Conor McGregor card. I mean, they just do, because they cannot put Conor on the same card as UFC champions. Dana just will not do it because the champions get pay-per-view percentage, and there is no way in hell that Dana White is paying out a pay-per-view percentage to a champion, essentially leeching off Conor McGregor. And unfortunately, pretty much every single UFC event has a champion on it, so it is just difficult for them to create an entire event around Conor McGregor, and because Conor pulled out with a broken toe the last time, there just aren't any available pay-per-view slots until next year, so Michael Chandler says he's done waiting, right? And, I don't think it's anybody's fault necessarily, but look, I'm glad to see Chandler finally moving on, but I will be honest with you, I will be completely honest and transparent. I am terrified of this matchup for Charles Oliveira. I am utterly terrified. And look, according to the fans' reaction to this, a lot of people are saying, great fight, but I don't really see it going any different than the first time they fought. And I think that's a fair take, but I think what people need to remember is the first time they fought was fucking wild. That fight was insane. I mean, look, I understand Charles Oliveira gets hurt pretty much in every single fight he's ever had, but nobody hurt him like Michael Chandler did. I mean, he was really, really hurt, and that is because Michael Chandler fights like a goddamn kamikaze pilot round one, all right? He is a tough fight for anybody round one because he goes at you so hard. He's so explosive. In my opinion, he's taking a lot of HGH, a lot of TRT. I mean, look at him. He's more explosive and jacked now at 37 years old than he was at 29 years old. And for somebody who doesn't have the most rock-solid striking defense as Charles Oliveira, yeah, I mean, this fight is terrifying. This fight is utterly terrifying. But of course, Charles Oliveira is going to be the favorite going into this fight. I mean, he should be the favorite, but again, Michael Chandler came out and said him and his coach, they're going to create a rock-solid game plan for Charles. I can almost guarantee you he's just going to be spamming overhand rights. But, I mean, that's the terrifying thing. Michael Chandler is so utterly dangerous. And if he lands clean, I mean, you never know what can happen. And the other big thing that is so scary about this matchup is Chandler is the definition of anti-jiu-jitsu. In terms of trying to set up offense off of your back, the most difficult people it is to do that against are very jacked, explosive, compact guys because it's so difficult to manipulate them. Their limbs are not very long. The second you grab a hold of them, they just yank themselves away, and it is so difficult. It is so difficult to get any proper offense off your back against guys like this, and that is Michael Chandler to a T. When he had Charles hurt and Charles had him in full guard, I mean, Charles really couldn't do anything. Now, the one silver lining here, though, is, like I said, Chandler is an extremely difficult fight for anybody round one. But the second round one ends, the odds of Michael Chandler winning just immediately fall off a cliff because he does not save any energy for the swim back. The second that round starts, he goes at you as hard as he can. He completely empties the gas tank on you, and once he gets a little more fatigued, once he slows down just a little bit, that's when he's more flat-footed, that's where he's standing a bit more still, and that's where you can really find openings to counter him, and that's what we saw in the first fight. But to me, the number one biggest question mark going into this fight, the number one thing that is the most make or break for Charles is, just what version of him are we going to see? Because, and this is another thing that I've talked about in depth on the channel before, is that, there are two versions of Charles Oliveira that we've seen in recent years, right? In the lightweight division, it does not matter who Charles is fighting, he is always going to have a submission advantage over them. He is arguably the best submission artist in the UFC, but when he fought Islam Makhachev and Arman Tsarukyan, for the most part, anytime they were grappling, it was pretty much because Charles was on his back playing full guard. And, as you guys know, I do not like that. I don't like that. Look, Charles, he is nasty off his back from guard, but there's just not a lot you can go for from that position. And again, it's such a parallel to before Islam Makhachev, where Charles was hunting takedowns, very consistently. Look, Michael Chandler was a high-level Division I All-American wrestler. That did not stop Charles from dropping in on a double leg that was so deep that Chandler himself said he had to jump guillotine because he was getting taken down. And of course, Chandler has to turtle and give up his back to somebody like Charles. But he didn't shoot a single takedown against Arman Tsarukyan, didn't shoot any takedowns against Islam, and again, I understand those guys are good wrestlers, but it's not like Charles has to get them flat on their backs and pin them. No, he just needs to cause scrambles, because that is where a submission artist is dangerous, where you're rolling around on the ground, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're stuck in a submission. He's got you in a guillotine, or a darce, or a leg lock, or an armbar, or anything. He needs to cause scrambles, but again, I think Charles really neutered his game, only fighting those guys from positions like this. So, when he fights Michael Chandler, is that what he's going to do? Is he going to allow Michael Chandler to get top position with his head pressed into the fence? And is Charles just going to choose to stay there? Because if he does, he's just not playing to his fullest strengths. That is what it comes down to. If he chooses to stay in a position like this against Michael Chandler, he's neutering his game. It is just that simple. And, I guess the other important thing we have to look at in this matchup is, okay, what if Chandler is being truthful? What if him and his coach really do come to a very solid game plan for how to fight Charles, which is, be way more patient, only explode in very particular moments, try to get it to the ground and just try to stay in full guard. We already know that Michael Chandler is going to be borderline impossible to submit if you're on your back against him. And look, if I was in Michael Chandler's corner, I'm telling him, find a way to get him flat on his back. Whatever it takes, find a way to get him flat on his back, try to push him up against the fence and stay there. Look, if Michael Chandler can pull that off, he can 100% win this fight, because I'm telling you, Oliveira is not going to be able to armbar him. He's not going to be able to triangle him off his back. And that's why I think on top, in closed guard is the best place for Michael to be during this fight. But even with that all being said, if that ends up being the case, 25 minutes is a long time for Chandler to not get reckless, to not get wild. That is his MO. He cares more about being exciting than he does actually winning. And, of course, I think at some point he's going to really go for it. He's going to fatigue himself, and Oliveira is probably going to find a finish. I think that is the most likely scenario. But again, no matter what, this really is a terrifying matchup. It just is.